Somewhere in Loudoun County, Virginia, a hum never stops. Day and night, 365 days a year, most Americans have no idea that hum is holding the internet together. The internet was engineered to survive nuclear war. It's lasted for decades. Now, it might not be the AI bubble that bursts first, but the infrastructure supporting it. Northern Virginia is home to the internet. Loudoun County alone handles 70% of global web traffic. Most Americans couldn't find this place on a map, but they should. Drive west out of Washington onto the Dulles Toll Road, and you'll see why. The strip malls thin out, the cul-de-sacs get more affluent, and then the land gets cheap enough that someone decided to build buildings the size of aircraft carriers on it. No windows, no signs, just chain link fences, cameras, and a low industrial hum that never stops. Amazon was built here first, then Microsoft, then Google, simply because it was cheap enough, close enough, and nobody said no fast enough. One sustained failure in Northern Virginia doesn't slow the internet down, it takes significant portions of it offline entirely. Dominion Energy has a years-long waitlist for new grid connections. Projects keep getting approved faster than transmission infrastructure can support them. A grid built for suburbs is now being asked to power small cities stacked on top of each other, running 24 hours a day. Every one of these buildings has backup generators, fuel tanks, redundancy systems. On paper, they can survive a grid failure. In practice, they have roughly 72 hours. After that, they're on the same grid as everyone else. This is Ashburn, Data Center Alley. Loudoun County now has over 53 million square feet of either operating or under construction. That's over 900 football fields dedicated to AI. 30 years ago, this was a cheap place to put servers near Washington. Now, it's the densest concentration of internet infrastructure on planet Earth. By 2023, data centers already accounted for nearly a quarter of all electricity sold by Dominion across Virginia. By 2038, projected demand will be 5 times that. That's not theoretical either. Those are the contracts that have already been signed. And here is where it becomes a little frightening. By the end of 2024, Dominion was handling about 40,000 megawatts of data center power requests. To put that in human terms, that's every home in New York City and Chicago combined, suddenly demanding power from a single county in Northern Virginia. By early 2026, that number had nearly doubled. Because the queue of buildings waiting to be switched on kept growing while the transmission lines to feed them hadn't been built yet. In one zone of one state, by the early 2030s, a single hyperscale data center now draws as much power as roughly 80,000 homes. Loudoun has dozens of these already operating. There are dozens more under construction, and it's not hitting a limit. It's breaking through it, if anything, and it's causing panic in boardrooms. For 3 years, Dominion has been trying to figure out where all that power is supposed to come from. So far, the answer doesn't exist. In 2024, the system almost showed what failure looks like. On the evening of July 10th, a thunderstorm rolled across Fairfax County, Virginia. Lightning struck a high-voltage transmission line. One small piece of equipment, a lightning arrestor, failed. 6 tiny voltage drops followed, one after the other. It took milliseconds. In any other context, this would be a non-event. Voltage fluctuations happen on grids all the time. Refrigerators barely notice. Lights in your house don't even flicker. But not here. This is where 60 data centers all sit on the same transmission backbone. Many of them have millions of dollars of GPUs running models for OpenAI, Microsoft, Anthropic, and federal agencies. Each one is programmed to interpret any disturbance as an existential threat. Within milliseconds of that power dip, every single one severed its connection to the grid and switched to internal power. Enough power to light up hundreds of thousands of homes was dumped in roughly the time it takes to blink. From the grid's perspective, that's just as dangerous as losing supply. Frequency spikes, turbines spin too fast, equipment trips. PJM Interconnection, the regional operator, and Dominion had to react in real time. They had to throttle power plants and dump generation. They held the system together and narrowly avoided a blackout. The story barely made the news. 7 months later, in February of 2025, it happened again, this time on a different transmission line. Around 40 data centers dropped off this time. PJM caught it again, but only just. An executive at PJM later admitted that while these events hadn't technically caused emergencies, they had caused real concerns. The data centers that nearly toppled the grid in 2024 were the ones already operating. Most of the queued capacity hasn't even been built yet. Transmission lines required to feed those new buildings hadn't been approved. Substations hadn't broken ground. Dominion was getting fresh requests for an additional capacity each month, and that's on top of the permits already moving through the system. So, if a 1,500 megawatt simultaneous drop caused a near miss, what happens at 5 times the load? It's a question that doesn't have an answer. So, when Northern Virginia hit the limits, hyperscalers did the logical thing. They looked elsewhere. And it should have been a warning to everyone that was paying attention. They picked a desert. America's new frontier of AI infrastructure isn't Seattle or Boston or some climate-friendly Midwestern reclamation site. It's Phoenix, where average summer highs hit 107 degrees Fahrenheit. The reasoning isn't subtle either. Phoenix has cheap power, cheap land, and weak permitting laws. And critically, none of the multi-year grid waitlists that are strangling Virginia. Arizona will say yes when Virginia says wait. In 2024, a developer called Tract bought up a stalled residential subdivision west of Phoenix with plans to convert it into a $20 billion data center campus. But there is still one critical problem here, and that's water. This is a desert, one that is already struggling to sustain its population. The Colorado River is in long-term decline. Groundwater aquifers under farmland are visibly retreating year over year. Arizona has already been forced to forbid new residential subdivisions in some counties. There simply isn't enough water to permit them. And into that system, hyperscalers are adding facilities that consume millions of gallons of water per day. A mayor in the middle of one of the worst water crimes in modern US history defended the project with a straight face. According to him, water isn't the problem. Power is. A multi-billion-dollar facility rises over a depleted aquifer, and the limiting factor isn't survival. It's electricity. Virginia's power crisis exports itself westward. What Virginia couldn't solve with electricity, Arizona is now being asked to solve with something even scarcer. A single large data center can evaporate enormous volumes just to keep servers cool. Studies estimate that if planned facilities come online, water demand tied to data center power could rise dramatically across the region. Mesa, Avondale, and Phoenix have all passed ordinances capping industrial water use. Farmers are abandoning fields. Wells are running dry in rural areas. The Colorado River Compact, which determines how 7 states share the river, was built on assumptions that no longer exist. Now, as drought outpaces the deal itself, it's starting to break in real time. Federal models show what happens next. Central Arizona could lose roughly a quarter of its water supply, and the AI industry is setting up shop in the middle of it. While Virginia is hitting an electricity wall, Arizona is hitting a water wall. And then comes Texas. The next great solution. ERCOT, the Texas grid operator, is forecasting a massive demand from new data centers. But generation and transmission expansions are not keeping pace. Texas has no clear way to serve that load. Texas has already shown what happens when its grid is stressed. It collapsed during the winter of 2021. Heat waves in 2023 and 24 caused it to buckle. And now they're adding large-scale AI infrastructure into the mix. It's the same pattern all over the country. Hyperscalers flee Virginia for cheap power and hit Phoenix's water table. They escape Phoenix for Texas and find a grind already under strain. Each new cluster the industry picks ends up exporting one constraint to fix another. Within months, the chosen escape route becomes the next bottleneck. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon all run internal modeling that flags this trajectory. They have water dashboards. They have grid dashboards. They have heat maps showing exactly which counties run out of which resource by which year. Their own sustainability reports describe this future in plain language. They keep spending anyway. hitting the brakes isn't actually an option for them. Walking away at this point would crater their stock prices. Every dollar a competitor spends and you don't is market share you might never win back. Big tech ended up trapped in a dilemma. If everyone slowed down, everyone wins, but no one can afford to blink first. So they don't. They all keep building faster and bigger and deeper into deserts that can't sustain it. It's a true AI arms race, which is where the system stops being an infrastructure story and starts becoming a financial one. Here's what an arms race looks like when the weapons are data centers. No hyperscaler can slow down because the moment they do, a competitor fills the gap. So they keep going. In 2026, the result of that logic is a number that shouldn't be possible. The top 5 US hyperscalers are set to spend somewhere between $650 and $720 billion on capital expenditure in a single year. That's close to matching the US military budget, more than Belgium's entire economy produces in a year. Roughly 2/3 of that money goes directly into the buildings, servers, and cooling systems that need power and water that doesn't exist yet. This is a collective inability to stop. Amazon alone is putting roughly $200 billion into capital expenditure in 2026. That's nearly 50% higher than its previous record. And it raises a question: who is paying these companies enough money to justify spending $750 billion in a single year? Right now, and increasingly, no one. Cloud businesses are growing, but the spending isn't tied to current revenue. It's tied to expected future revenue. And that future only exists if the infrastructure holds long enough to support it. The checks are starting to outrun the wallets. Analysts estimate that Amazon could post negative free cash flow in 2026, somewhere between $17 and $28 billion, depending on who you ask. Other models show Meta having a free cash flow drop of 90%. Amazon has already signaled it may need to raise debt or equity to sustain this pace. That's the warning flare. And it's borrowing into a depreciation schedule that no one quite wants to talk about openly. Those 5 hyperscalers were on track to add roughly $2 trillion of AI-related assets to their balance sheets by 2030. AI hardware depreciates fast, around 20% a year. By the end of the decade, these companies could be staring at $400 billion a year in depreciation costs. Depreciation alone begins to rival the entire current profit base of the industry. Each year, every year. For that math to work, AI revenue doesn't just need to grow, it needs to outrun the combined earnings power of the largest tech companies on Earth. And there's a physical reason behind that depreciation curve. It has nothing to do with accounting tricks. A standard server rack might draw 10 kilowatts. An AI cluster can pull more than 100. That rates extreme heat. Inside those windowless buildings in Loudoun, chips cycle from idle to full power in milliseconds. That creates mechanical stress on the silicon, on solder joints, and on everything that holds that system together. Traditional hardware is engineered to last 5 to 7 years. AI hardware is being pushed towards failure much faster. Liquid cooling is now mandatory for every rack. Complex systems pump chilled fluid directly across the processors. Those plumbing systems introduce their own risks. A single gasket failure or a pump pressure drop can destroy $1 million rack before a shutdown is triggered. America is building a global economy on hardware running at a permanent redline, and it is not stable. The bet itself is pretty simple. Within a few years, AI products will generate enough revenue to justify it all. Enough to make these buildings look cheap. Hyperscalers can ride out the weight. They have the balance sheets, they can raise the capital, they can absorb the volatility. The companies built on top of them can't. Startups training on Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and Google Cloud Platform aren't burning big tech's balance sheets. They're burning venture capital, and that comes with a ticking clock. When power gets rationed, water gets allocated, or a queue slips another year, it's not Amazon that misses payroll. It's the startup that prepaid for compute that never arrives. The training run gets delayed. The product launch slips. The next funding round dries up. That company doesn't slow down. It dies where it stands. And it's not just startups either. Microsoft has disclosed a commercial cloud backlog exceeding $80 billion. That's demand already sold, already contracted, that can't be delivered. Why? Because the power isn't available. The water can't be allocated. The infrastructure isn't ready. The physical system can't deliver. The problem isn't the software, it's wires and pipes. And that gap in the system shows where you wouldn't expect. In Virginia, it shows up on domestic bills. For most of the last decade, Virginia residents had no idea any of this was their problem. Data centers existed in fenced-off industrial zones. They paid taxes, employed almost no one, and stayed out of sight. Then, the bills started arriving. You can't build the equivalent of multiple new cities of electricity demand for free. Somebody has to pay. That means new transmission lines, new substations, new high-voltage corridors carved through existing neighborhoods. All of it cost billions. Under the old rate structures, those costs were distributed across every customer on the system. Homes, schools, hospitals, small businesses, and the hyperscalers. They all paid in proportion to their use. It sounds fair until you realize hyperscalers drove the overwhelming majority of demand, and they paid a fraction of the cost. The State Corporation Commission of Virginia ran the numbers in 2024 and 2025. The projections were pretty ugly. Without intervention, residential electricity bills in Virginia were on track to climb by tens of dollars a month. That money had nothing to do with household demand. It had everything to do with subsidizing data halls for trillion-dollar corporations. Public hearings followed. Residents pushed back. Big tech defended their position, sending in lobbyists, lawyers, and PR teams. Their argument was that their economic contribution to Virginia more than justified the rate structure as it stood. Local officials argued the opposite. In November of 2025, after months of hearings, Dominion got approval to do something it had never done before. State regulators signed off on a brand new rate class, formerly known as GS5. It was designed specifically to make hyperscale data center customers fund the infrastructure their projects require directly. There were long-term commitments, billions of dollars in upfront costs, a first-of-its-kind ring fence in the United States. It was supposed to be a victory for residents. The deeper truth is that the GS5 fight only happened because the underlying numbers had become impossible. Data centers now consume so much of Dominion's grid that they had a choice. They had to reorganize the cost burden or watch residents revolt. Around the same time, 8 different data center projects across Virginia got canceled or significantly downsized. They were killed by zoning fights, lawsuits, transmission disputes, and noise complaints. The most visceral fight, though, has been about diesel generators. Across Virginia, there are now roughly 9,000 permitted diesel backup generators tied to data centers. Well over half of them are clustered inside Loudoun County alone. The vast majority are what regulators classify as Tier 2, the low-budget kind that pumps out soot clouds. They're supposed to run only in real emergencies, to protect the data centers during a blackout and then shutting off. But this is the AI economy, where buildings can't afford to be down for even a few minutes. So generators run far more often than the design ever accounted for. During one substation fire near Ashburn, residents had to listen to data center backups roar for over 24 hours straight. Shoppers in adjacent strip malls reported clouds of exhaust drifting through parking lots. In December of 2025, Virginia regulators quietly widened what counts as an emergency. Not because the disasters got worse, but because the grid did. Data centers can now run diesel backups more freely, not as a last resort, but as a gap filler when promised power doesn't show up. A state report laid out the consequences. Northern Virginia's backup generators could emit nearly 10,000 tons of toxic fumes a year. That's about half of all other sources in the region combined. Homes built in the early 2000s now sit a few hundred yards downwind from what used to be a quiet office park. Today, it's a data center campus where dozens of diesel generators can spin up at once and run for hours. In Loudoun County, home listings have started flagging proximity to these sites. Some realtors won't say it publicly, but on certain streets, prices have stalled. They're not crashing, but they're just stuck. Meanwhile, the rest of Northern Virginia housing keeps appreciating. Schools have logged complaints about exhaust haze on field trip days. The fight is now about legal rights. Who gets to decide how many more windowless server warehouses can be built inside county lines before the air itself changes? In Loudoun County, the concern isn't future risk. It's crossing a line where the suburbs end up with worse air than the city they surround. So who exactly is paying for the AI economy? Hyperscaler shareholders are paying with eroding cash flow. Startups built on top of them are paying with delays they can't survive. The Phoenix homeowner is paying with water rationing, and the Loudoun County resident is paying with toxic air. They agreed to none of this. They benefit from almost none of it. By the close of 2025, the political ground in Virginia had shifted permanently. Hyperscalers stopped being treated as silent industrial neighbors. They started being treated as something closer to an occupying force. Their negotiating leverage was eroding as fast as the local goodwill. Northern Virginia residents now show up to county board meetings with printouts of Dominion's filings, with maps of proposed transmission corridors, with photographs of the haze. The era of polite zoning hearings has ended here. Imagine if all of this were happening to a robust, redundant, distributed system, the kind of internet Cold War engineers actually designed. None of it would matter that much. A failure here, a delay there, an occasional lawsuit, the rest of the network would just route around it. But that's not the system America's AI economy was built on. It was built on a single piece of geography. Every data center in Northern Virginia has backup power. Generators, fuel tanks, redundancy systems. They have on-site engineers trained to manage transitions to and from grid power. They can operate independently for around 48 to 72 hours. After that, every server, every model, every cache, every user account is on the same grid as everyone else. The same grid that's already been rescued twice in 12 months. The most sophisticated artificial intelligence ever built has a 3-day contingency plan. In October of 2025, a software issue in one AWS region caused widespread outages. Services went offline globally. Ring doorbells stopped recording. Fortnite kicked millions of players off mid-match. Britain's tax website crashed. Even Amazon's own Alexa went silent and stopped answering questions. For roughly 15 hours, a critical software malfunction in Northern Virginia rippled across the global internet. That was a problem AWS could fix from a keyboard. The diesel was never tapped. Backups never even kicked on. Independent insurance analysts still estimated the direct losses to the global economy in the hundreds of millions of dollars. There were secondary impacts on commerce, productivity, and lost transactions running far higher. And now, remove the ability to fix it remotely. Imagine a transformer fire at a critical substation, the kind that takes weeks to source a replacement for. High-voltage transformers are not stocked at Home Depot. They're custom-built, often overseas, and shipped on flatbed trucks under police escort. Imagine a sustained heat dome over Virginia in late July, just like the conditions that triggered the 2021 Texas grid collapse. Residential AC demand and data center demand peaking simultaneously. The queue of new transmission lines is still 7 years from completion. By day 3, facilities shut down. Trucks can't get through because gas stations have lost power. The same heat dome that took down a transmission line has now taken down the rest of the regional grid. Campuses start to go dark. Sure, the bigger ones with deeper fuel reserves will last a few hours longer. Smaller co-location facilities will crash first, though. Banking APIs start timing out. Authentication portals stop responding. Hospital scheduling systems freeze. Federal contractor logins fail. Financial and healthcare services start to fail as well. At that point, it's no longer a tech outage, it's a systemic failure. By day 4, the headlines stop being about an AI collapse, and they start being about whether banks will open on Monday. The question is no longer whether some piece of infrastructure hits a hard limit. The only question then is which limit hits first. There's a conversation happening in grid operator boardrooms, in state legislatures, and in federal energy agencies that hasn't reached the public yet. The math on Virginia's grid doesn't work with the facilities already built. It works even less with what's still in the queue. At some point, the only lever left is the one nobody wants to touch: shutting facilities down, capping new connections, telling a hyperscaler that their next campus doesn't get power not in 5 years, not ever. That conversation is coming. The grid operators know it, Dominion knows it, and some of the hyperscalers know it too. The question isn't whether the AI build-out hits a hard stop, it's whether that stop is managed or the grid makes the decision for everyone. And how much of the digital world it pulls down with it when it does. Inside PJM's control room, the operators already know what years 2027 through 2031 are going to feel like. They're now running daily simulations of scenarios that would have been considered absurd 3 years ago. They model heat dome events arriving simultaneously with transmission faults. The Northern Virginia load is projected to be roughly twice what it is today by 2029. The new transmission infrastructure will still have not arrived. Internal forecasts describe a window running from about 2027 through 2031. During that window, the grid will be carrying more demand than its physical components were ever rated to handle. While replacement infrastructure is still under construction, operators describe a feeling of running a marathon at sprint pace, and the finish line is still several years out. The internet was designed so no single failure could take it down. The AI economy rebuilt the system around exactly that failure. It's a concentrated infrastructure. It tied it to finite resources. It scaled demand faster than physical systems could allow. And it assumed those limits wouldn't matter. And underneath all of it, the most advanced computing system ever built runs on backup fuel. It's measured in hours, not days of resilience, not weeks of redundancy. Hours. The original internet avoided single points of failure. This system depends on one, and it runs on a clock with 72 hours. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turn on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on MatPack.